Welcome back into the Red Zone podcast. My name is Colten Bartholomew, U football beat reporter here for the Wisconsin State Journal, joined by longtime basketball and football beat reporter Jim Polzin. And it is a busy week here at the State Journal. We've got a little bit of football stuff going on with some news. We've got obviously the NCAA tournament coming up for basketball starting this weekend. Men's hockey just wrapped up the Big Ten tournament, and they're heading into the NCAAs. The women are in the NCAAs. They won their quarterfinal matchup. We're going to have Todd Milewski on a little bit later to talk about hockey. So whole bunch of stuff coming your guys' way. This is a huge podcast. Probably going to be the longest one that we've put out there because I know Jim and I have a lot to talk about, and then Todd and I have a lot to talk about as well. So lots of stuff, lots of good stuff coming your way here in this podcast. But we're talking with Jim here on Wednesday afternoon or Wednesday morning here. About to go down to Indy in a couple of days to see this first round matchup for the Badgers with North Carolina. Just before we're going to get into it in more detail, but just what's your read on this tournament overall and what we saw on Selection Sunday, Jim?
Well, yeah, there's a lot to digest with this tournament just in general in terms of covering it. You know, as it has been the case all season long, things are done over Zoom. You and I were talking before we started recording that there's various obstacles in the way in terms of covering the team, like where you have to be to pick up credentials, how quickly you have to get out the arena. It's just different. It's been different all year, but it's a completely different setup. Just going to one area, I should say. I almost said one city, but considering they're going to be in West Lafayette, and just that, that dynamic too is Wisconsin's first round game is going to be in an arena that they're familiar with. They haven't necessarily been successful there, but they're familiar with Mackey Arena, having played Purdue there just, basically 2 weeks ago. So there's a lot of intriguing things. And I think this matchup is an interesting one for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to give you guys a quick rundown of the show today, lots of stuff, as I mentioned, but we're going to talk about the Badgers getting the 9 seed in the tournament, why that was right or wrong. I know Jim's got some thoughts on this one. We're going to talk about this North Carolina game in the first round. It's 8-9 matchup. Kind of rare, and Jim wrote about it earlier this week, but rare that you're going to see North Carolina and Wisconsin in an 8-9 matchup in the NCAA tournament. So some interesting stuff there. The inside that matchup, you got some really freshman studs from North Carolina versus the veteran guys here in Wisconsin. So some interesting stuff there. We're going to give you some of our tournament picks. And then we're also going to talk about a story that Jim has coming out. Should be out by the time you guys hear this. It's coming out Wednesday. About the strength and conditioning staff issues and the staffing issue that's been going on in that department at Wisconsin over this season, and how basically hockey teams and basketball teams have been sharing a very limited staff of strength and conditioning coaches. So some really interesting stuff there. Obviously a lot of Big Ten basketball news Jim and I are going to talk about. And then also Reggie Pearson transfers off the football team. We'll get into that a little bit. And then, like I mentioned before, Todd will be coming on to talk about hockey, all the tournament action there. So packed podcast, lots of stuff to get into, and we'll get into it right after this. All right, Jim, so let's jump into the seeding overall to start with, because when Selection Sunday is happening Sunday afternoon, Sunday night, people were a lot more surprised than I thought they were going to be, because, we talked on the podcast for a few weeks, and every Badgers bracketology thing that we would post on madison.com said, like, hey, 8 or 9 is probably about where they're going to be. And then it comes out to a 9 seed and people kind of start freaking out. And I don't know, to me, that was the trend, and that's where everybody kind of saw them going. What was your take on that?
Yeah, I wasn't all that surprised. I had written something leading into Selection Sunday about kind of how I thought Wisconsin was going to be a tough team to slot just because of their resume. I looked at 2 of the more respected bracketologists at the time. Saturday when I was writing, Lunardi had them as a 6.
Yeah.
And Jerry Palm, another one, had them as a 9. So I just kind of thought that was how it's a tough team to gauge. Very tough schedule for Wisconsin, but didn't win a lot of, not a lot of signature victories there, and certainly none recently. The computers, the efficiency computers, the Ken Palms of the world, love Wisconsin. I think they're number 10 or 11 at this point. Other more resume based metrics like the Kevin Pauga index had them in the 50s. So I think, this year more than anything, there's probably an argument to be made for using the resume based one over the efficiency metrics because just because of the fewer games and stuff like that. So I understand why they're a 9. I mean, and whether you're an 8 or a 9 doesn't really make a difference, right? I mean,
Right.
I think the hope for Wisconsin was maybe be a 7, and it's a little bit of an easier path, but I don't know that it matters down in there. I just think Wisconsin was one of, and I think I said this in my story for Sunday is that the NCAA, when they talked to the NCAA, the guy there said the toughest part isn't figuring out the first 16 seeds. It's as always, it's figuring out the bubble, and then the next challenge is kind of that team 17 through 35, and that's where Wisconsin found itself because they all kind of look alike. They all have flawed resumes, and it's kind of hard to distinguish between them.
Yeah, and it's tough because I understand that there has been a push. I mean, sports as a whole is going under this, analytics revolution. Every sport's being kind of under this microscope of how do we be the most efficient you can. So when you look at Wisconsin on paper and with these computer rankings and they're so good at X, Y, and Z, but then I'm still probably a little bit more old school where it's like at a certain point you can have the best, most efficient offense in the computers that you want, but you got to win some games. And what was it? 11 attempts against ranked teams. They didn't win any of those games. 9 attempts against ranked teams.
9 attempts. The last 9. They did beat some ranked teams in December, but they don't have any ranked wins since the calendar flipped to 2021. And
right, and they had the really good chances, like the Iowa game at home. Yes, the refs made that a ref show at the end, and we talked about that last week. But there was an opportunity there to get a huge win that probably secured them at least a 7 seed in my mind. If they would have, an Iowa game, a Michigan game, an Illinois game, if you win one of those, even if you lose the rest of them, you probably bump yourself up 2 or 3 lines. And then you let your resume say, hey, our best wins Loyola in a thrown together game in a week in December. I get it. I wasn't surprised or upset at all that Wisconsin was on that line.
No, they certainly had the chances. I mean, the opportunities were there to take, and they didn't take them. I guess the counter argument would be that do you punish a team that's had these chances and reward a team that maybe they don't have as many losses, in part because they haven't played the schedule that Wisconsin has, right? And I look at North Carolina, not a lot of great wins on that resume either.
Nope.
I mean, they beat Virginia Tech, which I believe is a 4 seed, or maybe not. They do Florida State. They will win over Florida State, which I think was a 4 seed. The quad, I think they were 3-8 against quad 1. Wisconsin was 5-10 or something. It's very similar, very ugly. And that's what I was saying before is that, you compare a lot of these 7, 8, 9, 10 seeds, they all kind of look alike. And it's and choosing who's who had to be a difficult task for the NCAA tournament committee. And now it's up to Wisconsin to go out and prove them wrong. If they think they were slighted, they've got a chance. They've got a chance in the first round. And then if Baylor's there waiting for them, that's one more final opportunity to prove they can beat one of the top tier teams.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So let's jump into this North Carolina matchup, Tim, because I called you Tim, my bad. Sorry. Jim.
Tim.
My bad. Just because I think it's interesting that I could make an argument that these teams are like kind of inverses of each other, where the results have been very similar, where they've been sporadic. They haven't done very well against some of the better teams they've played. But when you just look at how they play, like North Carolina has dominated inside. They've got this 4 big rotation that foul trouble doesn't really seem to matter for them. They snatch all these rebounds. They're crazy on the boards like that and make it so hard for teams to score at the rim. And then Wisconsin, we've been talking all year about their issues inside the post. But then at the same time, North Carolina can't shoot, and Wisconsin is pretty reliant on making their outside shots when they're good. So I think this is a really kind of fun matchup. And then, as we mentioned before, 2 kind of bigger brand names. Obviously, North Carolina, top 2 or 3 in all of college basketball. And Wisconsin's really starting to establish themselves in the top tier as well. But I think this is a fun matchup stylistically, and then just 2 big brand names going at it in the first round here.
Yeah, I agree with you. A team that plays fast against a team that, is a little bit faster than it has been in previous years, but still one of the slower tempo teams, in the country. I do think, I'm going to be writing about this later in the week, but North Carolina is the best offensive rebounding team in the country. They collect 41.7% of their misses, which that offensive rebounding percentage leads the country. And it's not just one or two guys. It's all four of those big guys, and even Leaky Black, who's a 6'8", wing. He gets some offensive rebounds too. I was watching some of their game against. I went back and watched online. Actually, I watched parts of 3 of their ACC tournament games, and it's just it almost becomes like a volleyball match where their big guys are jumping up and just kind of tipping the ball in after misses. So that's a problem. And Wisconsin's had problems at times keeping teams off the offensive glass. Iowa being kind of the number one problem. Illinois did it to them a little bit too. So you do wonder about this matchup with a long athletic roster. Containing that is going to be absolutely the key to the game for me. If they can limit those second chance points, I think Wisconsin's got a chance, but I can also see it going the other way where things get out of control because North Carolina is just, scoring on putbacks every trip down the floor.
Yeah, that number is crazy. 41% of your 41% of your shots, offensive rebound. I mean, so you're saying every 2 possessions we get 2 or 3 chances, or 3 or 4 chances at least. It's a crazy number. And I think one of the things that it's going to come down to is in key moments, like late in shot clocks, if you have a good defensive possession, you force up a bad shot. If you're Wisconsin on defense, you force North Carolina into a bad shot. You've got to finish that possession off because that's probably what I would say North Carolina does the best. As shaky as they've been all year, it's like they just give themselves so many more chances than they allow other teams. That how bad they are at shooting, we'll get into in a second, but how poor shooters they are doesn't really matter because they give themselves, tip-ins and second chances to get another drive to the basket or something like that. But when you get into that a little bit further, it's not going to be, Micah Potter and Nate Reavers, I think, collecting all these rebounds. I think it's going to be guys like Davison, Wall, Davis, diving in there. When a big is boxed out, diving in there, making sure their guy doesn't have an angle on it and finishing off these possessions with rebounds, because I think the forwards and the front court for the Badgers are going to have their hands full with the physical test there, expecting them to be snatching up a bunch of rebounds as well, or at the same time. I don't think it's a good formula.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've said that on earlier episodes is that sometimes the reason a guy like Reavers and Potter, their rebound numbers is down is because their primary objective out there is to box out the the main rebound for the other team, and then like you said, that's where they need a Davis, a Wall, a Ford, Davison to come in and clean up, and that's going to have to happen. It's going to have to be a group effort. I mean, the rebounding is going to have to be a group effort. The thing I think I'm a little concerned about, Colten, is a lot of people have asked, and I just got an email literally as we were talking. They want to see Potter and Reavers together on the court, and I do think that might happen.
Oh, okay.
Out of absolute necessity, because North Carolina's so big and always going to be big. They always have 2 bigs on the court, at the same time. So I do think you're going to have to see some of that Potter Reavers pairing, but you can't do that for 40 minutes, right? I mean, those guys need breaks. I think the thing I'm most concerned about is foul trouble. Mm-hmm. If a Potter or a Reavers, the first 5 minutes of the game, I think is so important. If they start together, which I don't know whether a guard will do that, but if they do, if one or both of them get a foul early, you really could be in a bad situation. Even if you start one of them and that guy gets a foul and you bring Potter, I just think keeping those guys out of foul trouble in the first half is crucial, because they just don't. Beyond those 2, there's no size. Stephen Crowell's not ready. Joe Hedstrom's not ready. Ben Carlson, I'm doing a note on him for tomorrow. I asked Greg Gard about him. He hasn't played since mid-December. He's back practicing, but Greg Gard doesn't think he's, you can throw him out there. Just doesn't think it'd be a good situation to throw him out there after 3 months off. So you're really, really light in the front court, and that could be a problem if a Potter or a Reavers gets in foul trouble. It could be ugly. So I think that's the one matchup that, has to scare you if you're a Wisconsin fan, is that North Carolina is so big, and you can clearly see a path to Wisconsin being in trouble because of losing a guy for an extended period. And the other thing about playing Potter and Reavers together, those guys are at their most efficient selves when they're kind of in the 20 to 25 minute range. I think anytime you get those guys over 25 minutes, you're going to see the fatigue show, and it's going to result in either bad shooting or turnovers or sloppy defense. It's just, it's a tough situation Wisconsin finds itself in because there's 4 North Carolina guys that are big. There's only 2 Wisconsin guys that are big.
Yeah, and to your point about if they play a bunch together, I mean, the foul trouble is obviously the number one concern, but just you put both of those guys out there, and then they're just going to get pick and rolled to death, and it's going to add to the fatigue. And then let's say they start switching well enough to at least avoid foul trouble, but then you're getting these stud guards that North Carolina has that we're going to get into in a second here on the drive against big guys, and that's always a bad matchup, and especially for Potter. Like Reavers has done, I think, a better job throughout his career avoiding contact and then being able to block shots with his length, but Potter seems to just not have that quickness, that lateral movement to be able to do that with a good guard in front of him. I'm not saying he should be able to. It's just that's a tough matchup for any big. So I just think that I would, if I'm Wisconsin, I'm playing one big and I'm trying to hit enough shots that forces North Carolina to go small with me. That's probably a high number of shots, and we haven't seen them do that in a while. But that, to me, throwing both the bigs out there and risking that is almost just playing in their hand too much and kind of giving them playing their style of game right from the jump.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I look at, actually, I got a story coming later this week. I talked to an assistant coach. I don't want to give it away, but I talked to an assistant coach from another team who has kind of looked over this matchup. And he said guys like Tyler Wall, Aleem Ford are X factors because he thinks that North Carolina can be vulnerable against those types of players that can, get to the rim and draw the bigs away from the basket. So, I've been saying this for weeks. Wisconsin needs everybody to play well, above average, if it's going to beat quality teams. I think that's particularly true for this game, that they need the second tier guys like Ford and Wall to play well and to, contribute and be kind of the X factors, because I do think at best Potter and Reavers, if they can come out of that matchup even in terms of front court production, I think that's, I think you've got to win there if you're Wisconsin. You need the other guys to contribute. The other thing I want to mention too is these North Carolina guys are big. They're not Luka Garza.
No,
they're not
Kofi Coburn. Yeah,
no, they're not Hunter Dickinson. They're effective big guys, but they're not all-world, all-American big guys like Wisconsin's seen. So certainly they've seen enough guys that they should be used to playing in size, and these guys aren't quite as skilled. But again, if they can score on putbacks and make life miserable for Wisconsin just on the offensive glass. So I think that's something to watch.
No, I totally agree with you there. I want to talk about these guards because I think this is a matchup that if Wisconsin wins this game, I think to your point, it's going to be they even out the front court, and then I think the back court's going to have to win this game for Wisconsin because North Carolina has a couple of freshmen that are starting at guard for them. Caleb Love is their point guard, and then Kerwin. Now I'm blanking on his last name.
Kerwin Walton.
Walton, yes. Kerwin Walton is their kind of off guard, kind of 3-point specialist at the 2 guard. These guys turn the ball over like crazy, and that's something that if you're Wisconsin, you don't get out of your game trying to force some of those turnovers, but that's one of your strengths is playing enough pressure defense, or at least being a good enough on-ball defender to force some of those turnovers. And I think that's one of the things that Wisconsin can really take advantage of, especially in the Demetric Trice versus Caleb Love matchup. Caleb Love's a really great athlete and a solid point guard, but right now he's sitting at about a 1-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. And I think if you're Demetric Trice, not only are you having the best season of your career here at Wisconsin this year, but this is a matchup that you can just win your one-on-one pretty much every time on the defensive floor if you play a good game, and that's going to swing this whole matchup because Love has the ball. I wish I had a little bit more advanced stats on this, but just watching some YouTube stuff and looking at the stats, Caleb Love has the ball on a ton of North Carolina possessions, and the time of possession he has the ball is way higher than you would normally expect a freshman point guard to have. That's not having a crazy number season. So I think to me that's something that Wisconsin can really use to their advantage because North Carolina likes to dribble a bunch. They go to the hole all the time, and that opens up a lot of opportunities to tip the ball away, create some steals, and then maybe get an easy basket on the other end, or at least just limit possessions that North Carolina can get a shot off and then get to that offensive rebounding that we've been talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point, and I think you said it on the Roy Williams news conference today, but he said that he knows it's going to be a lower possession game, right? I mean, if things go well for Wisconsin, this game's going to have somewhere between 60 and 65 possessions. And if North Carolina is turning the ball over on 12 to 14 of those, that limits a lot of shots, and that works in Wisconsin's favor. So I think you're right. The help defense is going to have to be good. I think they can take some chances and let North Carolina. I think you can help off 3-point shooters because there's no proof that those guys can do it. I mean, a real bad sign would be if North Carolina starts hitting some 3-point shots early in that game. I think that's a sign that Wisconsin probably is not going to have a chance because I think they're going to let North Carolina shoot and kind of pack the lane and kind of play that pack line defense. But if North Carolina can make them pay for it by making shots, it's going to be trouble. You mentioned Caleb Love. That's the one guy that the assistant coach I talked to brought up. He's like, you got to stop him from getting stuff early, especially close to the rim. He's going to try to get to the rim, and he's a guy that if he scores a lot early, confidence builds, and suddenly those outside shots start going in. So I think, again, the first 5-10 minutes of that game are so crucial. If Wisconsin can kind of be in lockdown mode, I think they can frustrate these guys. I really do. But if it goes the other way, I think you've got a young, talented North Carolina team that suddenly starts believing in itself, and it could be trouble.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned the help defense, and that's where, in my opinion, a guy like Wall and a guy like Jonathan Davis become so crucial because, I mean, that's probably the best skill that Jonathan Davis has defensively right now is reading passing lanes and making quick decisions to get in them. And that's, to me, where he can make a big impact on this game because North Carolina is not a great passing team for a team that's like I wouldn't even call them like high efficiency, but like solid when they get toward the rim. Their assist numbers are not what you would think they would be. Like you would think they would have a lot more of those dump off assists and alley-oop assists, that type of thing. So I think that the amount of wing to wing and wing to top passing that there's going to be, Jonathan Davis can make a big impact, tipping some of those away, maybe getting a breakout dunk or two off of those. And then Wall, I think that he's somebody that North Carolina, as it's kind of weird because you think about North Carolina, that's like wing you, right? Like they always have 2 or 3 like awesome wings, but this season it's a little bit more straight up big guys, straight up guards, and I don't think they have that elite wing talent this year. And I think Wall might be, have the ability to defend some of these guys better than in years past against the North Carolina team. So I think Davis and Wall are going to be 2 of the bigger, and then you could probably throw Ford in there as well, are going to be 2 or 3 of the biggest defensive factors because I think they're going to have to be the most active, getting in passing lanes and tipping balls away.
Yeah, I totally agree. And then, the other thing when you're talking about that is Wisconsin has not finished well. And I think you've really got to be able to finish well. It's going to be hard with a lot of long bodies around, but they're going to have chances, I think. I think they're going to be able to break down this defense and get, in the paint, get to the rim. You got to make some of those bunnies when you have a chance. When you have a great look, you've got to take advantage because I think they'll be there. They were in the Iowa game. Some of that was Iowa blocking shots, but there were times where, they got to the rim and just couldn't finish. And I think, again, now more than ever, you've got to be efficient in how you finish shots, whether it's inside or out. If the opportunity is there, you just can't waste it because there's just zero margin for error.
Yeah. One of the things that is a clear weakness of this North Carolina team is the shooting. Kerwin Walton is the only real shooter that they have in the starting 5. He's a solid 3-point shooter, but right now they're shooting 31.7% on threes as a team, and that's in the bottom, like I think it was like bottom third of the country, bottom quarter of the country, national from a national rankings perspective. And then they're only shooting 44% from the field as a team, which is not what you would think when you've got all these big guys and all these offensive rebounds are leading the tip-ins and stuff. So if you're Wisconsin, I think you said it earlier, like try to pack that middle and just force them to hit some threes before you get out of that, in my opinion. Like everything good for this North Carolina team comes from driving and getting inside. And that has been an issue for Wisconsin, as we've seen against some of the more athletic teams they've played. And that can be an issue. But when you don't have the 3-point shooters to kind of balance that out, if you're Wisconsin on defense, you've just got to say to yourself, let's make them make some threes and then get us out of this before we really commit to getting out on the 3-point line, because this team's not good at shooting, and our only chances to swallow up some of these rebounds and give up or not give up some of these offensive rebound chances is to be in the paint and be active down there.
Yeah, I think that's what I was kind of alluding to earlier. Is I think that's the only. I mean, I think that's how you have to play this team, and hope is not a strategy, but I do think you've got to kind of pick your poison, and defending the paint's got to be the number one priority. And if they beat you from the outside, then you adjust. But I just think there's going to be nerves for both teams. Unfamiliar arena. I think you let North Carolina shoot, or at least don't help out on the right guys and force them to make 3-pointers. And if they do, like I said, I think you're in a world of hurt if they do. But the flip side is if you don't do that, I think you're leaving a lot of space in the paint, and North Carolina will just be able to kind of kill you in that area.
I like that. Hope's not a strategy.
Also not a good foul shooting team too. I mean, if it comes down to that, where you've got to foul to keep them from scoring easy buckets, I think you can do that with them, because it's not a team that's proven to be able to shoot. I think they're at something like 68% or something. It's not a good mark. So it's, there's hope there if you're Wisconsin.
Right. All right, Jim, prediction time. Are you still covering this basketball team Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening?
I've gone back and forth on this. I think North Carolina is going to win. I've gotten a little bit more optimistic about Wisconsin's chances as the week's gone on. But, not to the point. I just think this is a bad matchup. I thought that Sunday night when it came out, that a team with long athletic guys and a team that's really good on the offensive glass is a bad matchup for Wisconsin, and North Carolina kind of checks all those boxes. The thing I wonder, Colten, is the Big Ten was so good this year that will it shine in the NCAA tournament? And I think the top 5 teams will. But is Wisconsin a product of a really tough schedule? And they're basically the 6th best team in the Big Ten. North Carolina is basically the 6th best team in the ACC. We've seen throughout the year that the Big Ten's better. So does that mean that Wisconsin's better than North Carolina? I don't know. Maybe I'm overthinking it. But I think they have a chance. And I go back to the first 5-10 minutes of that game. I think we're going to find out a lot. If Wisconsin can come out confident and knock down some shots and limit looks for North Carolina, I think they have a chance. But if you're holding a gun to my head right now, I just think North Carolina is a team that looks like it's trending one way. Wisconsin looks like it's a team that's trending the other way. And I think North Carolina is probably the more likely team to win. But I think it will be close.
Yeah, I think it's going to be close too. And to me, the biggest thing is just I've seen this Wisconsin team struggle with just straight line drives all season long. And maybe it's because the teams they were playing in those games had better shooters and they were trying to, do both at the same, or defend both areas at the same time. And maybe they'll be able to adjust differently against North Carolina. I just think this team is just not done well when you drive straight at them, and North Carolina is going to do that possession after possession after possession. And we laid out the blueprint for how Wisconsin could win. I just think there's a lot of ifs there, and I just think North Carolina's got a better chance. But I would not be shocked if Wisconsin won. Like we said, there is a way for this team to beat North Carolina. I just think North Carolina's got a better chance of. I think they just have less or a wider margin for error on the North Carolina side. So I'm with you. I think North Carolina wins this game, but in a close way.
I agree too. The one thing we haven't mentioned is how the game is called. I think will be a factor too. If they're calling things tight, and Wisconsin guys get in foul trouble, if you lose a Tyler Wall, if you lose a Micah Potter for any extended time, you're all of a sudden pretty thin. And not to single out those two guys, but those are two guys that have been in foul trouble at times. I just think you're playing with fire if you get a couple guys with 2 fouls in the first half, and you have to go long stretches. The other thing we haven't really talked about, you got to avoid the long droughts. I mean, it's proven over and over to be the thing that kind of kills this team is the 5 or 6 minutes without a field goal or 2 points in 10 possession stretch. They just can't do that. I mean, they have to avoid it.
Yeah, and you mentioned the refereeing, and after I saw the 6 refs getting sent home from the Indy bubble for going out when they weren't supposed to, I got a lot more nervous for Wisconsin fans that Bo Borowski's going to be on the whistle on Friday. So
that. Yeah, and it's not just Bo Borowski. I mean, like seriously, the way I know he gets targeted by fans, UW fans and other fans. But he's probably one of the more higher rated officials in the Big Ten. You look at what games he was doing. He did the semifinal game of the Big Ten tournament. That means that who's ever making assignments likes the job he's doing compared to others. And I think that's the key phrase there is compared to others. There was a lot of bad officiating in the Big Ten this year. It's not just Bo Borowski. There's other guys too that I wonder the quality of the officiating. So 6 guys getting bumped out of the NCAA tournament means, new guys are going to move into those slots, and you're going to have a lot of average officials in this tournament, whether it's a Wisconsin game or not. So, it's been a storyline all year in the Big Ten, and I hope it doesn't become a storyline in the NCAA tournament where bad officiating is kind of the talk. But, it does worry me when you lose guys like John Higgins and Ted Valentine. For as much crap as he gets, I think he's a good official.
Yeah, I was about to say, I feel the exact same way about him, but there's a reason his name and he's on all these games. It's because overall he's still good.
One other quality official that's not going to make the mix. So you've lost, I didn't see that. I only saw 3 of the 6 names, but you've lost 3 really good officials, guys that have done Final Fours, which means that if they're gone, somebody's moving up that probably shouldn't be in the tournament.
Yeah, so that's definitely something to watch as you get into the tournament this weekend. And Jim and I want to kind of redeem ourselves for last week where we had the exact same Big Ten tournament, and we were like, I don't know, 70%-ish right. I mean, Ohio State was kind of the one buster beating Michigan after Livers got hurt, but Jim accurately predicted Illinois winning the Big Ten tournament and heading into this NCAA tournament as a 1 seed. So we're going to give you our Final Four and our title game going into the tournament here. And Jim, why don't you start with yours?
I was going to say, why don't you go first, because I'm looking for mine right now.
That works. All right. So I'm a gigantic wuss when it comes to filling out a bracket, and I'm very Big Ten biased just because that's the most basketball that I've watched all year, and I just think it was the best league. I don't think that's really a hot take. So for me, I've got Gonzaga. I think Gonzaga is going to be in the title game. So I've got Gonzaga, and I got Michigan in that Final Four matchup. And this is all dependent on Livers coming back. I think from what I've read that he's going to be available, even if he's a little bit limited in the early rounds. But I think he's going to be fully healthy by the time we get this far in the tournament. And then in the other matchup, I've got Ohio State and Illinois because I just think that the Big Ten was better than everyone this year. And Ohio State lost to Illinois mostly because I would assume it was incredible. And Cabello went crazy in that Big Ten championship game. So I think that's going to be a nice rematch in the Final Four. Title game for me, I've got Gonzaga and Illinois, and then I've got Illinois winning a very close game. I have it at 87-84.
Wow. We agree to some degree. I've got Gonzaga in one semifinal. I've got Alabama coming out of the East.
Okay.
The Michigan thing worries me. They just haven't been playing well, and depending on when Livers comes back, it's kind of a scary thing to me. So I'm taking Alabama, clear favorite in the SEC, or clear champion in the SEC. I don't know how good the SEC is, but that Alabama team can shoot the lights out at times. They've got some long athletic guys. I just think they're going to come out of that region. In the other semifinal, I've got Baylor against Illinois. I did not feel confident whatsoever about Baylor. I considered Purdue. I considered Ohio State. I considered Texas Tech as a kind of a flyer pick, but I stuck with Baylor, thinking that for a lot of the year they were like the second best team, and maybe they can recapture that magic. And I've got Illinois. So I've got Gonzaga and Illinois in the final. I'm taking Gonzaga. I just think it's their year. I think this is the year a team goes undefeated. I can see, I would like nothing more than Illinois winning it for the Big Ten. And I think, I just like watching that team. But I think Gonzaga's got, a little too much firepower. And
yeah. It was tough for me. I just picked Illinois just because they're a little bit more battle tested. And this is a knock on Gonzaga, throughout history, that they haven't played as many good teams, or their conference just isn't as good, and they're not going to get tested in and out. But Gonzaga, the times that they did play good teams this year, like they housed Iowa, they ran other good teams off the floor. So yeah, I think if Illinois wins and beats Gonzaga in a title game, it would be a very good game. So we're kind of in agreement. We got the same title game. I'm just excited to see how many Big Ten teams can advance at least deep, and hopefully not too many of them knock each other out. There's not too many chances for it. I think, who is it? Yeah, Gonzaga would have to play Iowa again. So you wouldn't have to get a big-time Big Ten matchup until the Final Four like I have with Ohio State and Illinois. But I just think this is going to be a tournament that the Big Ten can really kind of flex and say, like, hey, this is real, what you saw all season. Because I'm sure you've seen it too, Jim. People have been questioning, what's the Big Ten's best non-conference win all year? And there's not a great answer, but I just think that the Big Ten was so competitive and so good at the top, and I think it's going to show.
Yeah, that's kind of what I hope. After a season of watching these teams kind of beat each other up, I hope it shows in the tournament, and these teams don't flop. And this, it's been 21 years since this conference has won a title. I would not be surprised if it's Illinois. If Michigan can somehow find it. Those would be my two most likely picks. Ohio State scares me. Iowa scares me a little bit because, again, like when they go up against an athletic team, stopping them is going to be the problem. But they certainly have the offensive firepower. It should be a fun tournament. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Ohio State only scares me because they occasionally for 8-9 minute stretches just don't really care about defense.
And they're not big.
That's not great, but
they're just not a big team either. That's
right.
Kind of why, the wrong matchup is scary.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. All right, so getting out of the tournament and focusing a little bit more here on Wisconsin. I told you guys at the top of the show, Jim, Todd, and a little bit me. I'm not going to give myself much credit here. Mostly Jim and Todd. I've been working on this story about strength and conditioning and what's been going on in that world with a lot of the teams outside of football really have been stretched thin, the strength and conditioning staff. Basically, men's and women's basketball and men's and women's hockey have been sharing a very limited core of strength and conditioning coaches throughout the year. And that's pretty rare to see. Or I don't know. You can tell me about it more because you researched it, Jim, but it's not typical that the men's basketball program is not going to have their own strength and conditioning coach. Men's hockey is not going to have their own. Maybe the men's hockey works a little bit with the women, but it's a very strange situation Wisconsin finds themselves in.
Yeah, it's unique. I guess the CliffsNote version of this is that this dates to last February of 2020, when Eric Helland was forced to resign. And I think people know that story. At the time, Wisconsin kind of, you couldn't hire someone immediately. So they kind of, they got the women's basketball conditioning coach, strength conditioning coach, and the men's hockey strength and conditioning coach to help out kind of that last month of the season. And then after the season, they started the process of finding a replacement for Helen, but then it just, they just stopped the process basically because of the pandemic. Didn't know if there was going to be a men's basketball season. That was part of the reason. And they were looking at some pretty dire finances because of lost revenue from, mainly from the lack of fans being able to come and pay for tickets. So they decided, late in the process, well, we're just going to have the same person do it. So Jim Schneider is the men's hockey strength conditioning coach. He's also the men's basketball strength and conditioning coach this year. So he's kind of split his time 50-50, doesn't really travel with either team. It's just kind of a weird setup. It's not ideal. I think everybody I talked to admits it's not ideal, but the reasons they gave were the ones I just mentioned. Schneider didn't talk for this story. He's I think he wants to focus on this, helping the student athletes. So, it's kind of an interesting story. It's definitely unique. Like North Carolina has a men's strength conditioning coach for its basketball program, and they also have a guy assisting him, right? I mean, that's kind of how the big time programs do it. Wisconsin's got a guy who, he'll be there in Indy this week, and then he'll go join the men's hockey team wherever they go the NCAA tournament. And if those teams would somehow both go on extended runs, they're going to have to kind of choose where he goes. He's not going to be able to be with both teams at the same time, obviously. So it's just kind of a guy who's stretched pretty thin, and they admit that. And they, there's actually, everybody kind of speaks glowingly, whether from administrators to Greg Gard to Tony Granato, speak glowingly of the job this guy has done, and basically say that, if it was anybody else, we don't think we could have pulled it off, but they did. So it's interesting. And in the midst of all this, the women's basketball strength conditioning coach resigned in mid-January, kind of midway through the season. And part of her deal was family, but part of it too was her frustrations with kind of how this situation has been handled. And she was pretty outspoken in the story about how she feels like it's not fair to Jim Schneider, and it's not fair to the programs to put him in that position.
Yeah, and from a broader standpoint, it's really not fair to the student athletes, and especially when you look at men's basketball this year, as weird as this situation all is. And Roy Williams was talking about in the press conference I sat on this morning, they've got like a little area of the Indy Convention Center set up with like a few weight racks. Like they made like a makeshift weight room, and you would, if you have a full staff, like you would think a program like Wisconsin would, your dedicated strength coach could probably make it work and at least get the athletes where they need to be, strength and conditioning wise. But it's as we've been talking about the last few months, Jim, it's just such a weird situation that Wisconsin is a top level program. Like your three of your biggest programs between football, men's basketball, and men's hockey, how each one doesn't have its own dedicated person, and how you kind of got in. I understand the financial ramifications of COVID and everything that happened there, but how you went into a year and a season without somebody that's dedicated to the men's basketball strength and conditioning, it's just kind of wild.
Yeah, it is. And there's, like I mentioned the story too, like it's kind of easy to connect the dots between the team's performance this year and the fact that they don't have a full-time strength conditioning coach. I do think that there's context that needs to be added before jumping to that conclusion. It kind of starts with the fact that this wasn't a normal off season.
Right.
They were not on campus. So he was not going to be working with them on campus as a typical off season would go. He did virtual stuff with them, and, they did a lot of stuff on their own. And also men's hockey is having one of its best seasons in a while too. So it hasn't hurt them to have a guy who's being not with them full time. So I don't know. It's like I said, I understand why people will make that connection. I don't know that you totally can say with certainty that that's, it happened for that reason, and that they're struggling for that reason. I don't know that you can absolutely, say that.
Yeah, no, I hear you there. It's strength conditioning is one of the things that there's no apples to apples. It's hard to say for a basketball program, hey, that team's just stronger than us across the board. Like you don't know that. It's one of those things that it's hard to know quite what the impact is. It's just you hope, and we'll see maybe what the reaction is when the story comes out. You can read it on madison.com. Make sure you guys go check that out. But when the story comes out, we'll have to see what Wisconsin says. And, if, let's say, I don't know if they feel like they need to defend themselves for what they're doing, or how they feel about it.
I gave them that chance. And, Doug Teat, Justin Doherty, both are two administrators. They both addressed it. Greg Gard addressed it in a statement. Tony Granato talked about it. I think the plan is that after the season ends, they're going to move forward and hire someone. Part of this, what Doug Teat said was part of it was hiring someone in October. Once it became clear there was going to be a season, was something that he thought was not the way to go, because then those coaches have started their seasons And if you're doing interviews, they should be part of that process. And it was just too late. Like the comparison that can be made is that the football team, Ross Kalaji, the lead, the director of strength and conditioning, he took the defensive line job after the season. They quickly moved and promoted Sean Snee to his position. And now they've quickly moved and filled the vacant spot. Kind of everybody moved up a spot. Now they filled the opening. And Doug Teets said, that program's in its off season. You have the chance to interview and have the coaches involved. And that's why it's easier to do that. Whereas basketball, it was in the middle of the season. My argument would have been, I guess, get it done.
The season ended in March.
Right. Yeah. And get it done in June. And I don't care if you don't have if you don't know for sure whether there's going to be a season, I don't think that's a reason to not fill a position. And I understand that money's tight, but I just think from an optics standpoint, you're recruiting kids, and how do you not tell them this is the guy that's going to be working with you in the weight room? And to a lesser degree, when they would go on the road this year, they had a student athlete leading them in stretching, which again, anybody can lead a team in stretching. That's not the point. But from an optics standpoint, it just looked off. It didn't look like how a big time program, especially a men's basketball program that's been consistently in the NCAA tournament and is one of the biggest revenue producers in the game. It just didn't look like that's not how it's supposed to operate, right? It just looked off. And so that would be my counter argument is this should have been done in sometime during the summer. And I think people should read this story. There's a lot to it. Jim Snyder did apply for this job and was interviewed. And then the process stopped. So I don't know if he will interview again, if he will throw his name in the hat again. And I do know that in talking to players, they spoke well of him. They like him, and he seems to be a popular guy. So it's, it'll be interesting kind of where they go from here. Because I think, again, like I can't stress enough how important that position is, not just in getting a team physically and physically ready for a season and for games, but just from a camaraderie standpoint. This is the guy they spend a lot of time with. And I just think it's such a valuable position. Eric Helen, coaches and players raved about the job he did and how important he was to helping them win games. So I think you need to hire someone in there that, can really help you.
Yeah. And we might take this for granted, people knowing this, but in the off season, there's a lot of limits about how much time head coaches, position coaches are around the players, and not very, very, or I would say way less time restrictions that strength and conditioning staff and those coaches are around the players in that time. So like you said, there's a lot of time spent just players and strength and conditioning coaches in the off season, especially that's super important. And it increases how, the role that person, that coach takes in the program. And just to not have one, I think you said it well, the optics of it are weird. And then, it's tough to know the on field or on court, on ice impact, but at the same time, just it doesn't look right that Wisconsin men's basketball doesn't have its own strength and conditioning coach. And make sure you guys go on madison.com or get the paper and check this story out, because there's a lot of work into it, a lot of really good reporting. So a lot of stuff that you guys want to know, and kind of the inner workings of the athletic department. And it's cool that it wraps in all this stuff, like, the HR issue with Helen last year, the COVID issue that we're still going through a year later, all this stuff. It just kind of shows like how kind of crazy of a time this is in college athletics right here in Madison.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a complicated story. I mean, like, again, you've said I've kind of been working on it for 2 months, and not that I've been reporting on it the entire time, but I think finding the story and figuring out what exactly the story was kind of the challenge all along, and making sure I talked to enough people to hear their side and kind of explain why it is the way it was. So that's, finally, I'm glad it's finally coming out, because it's been something I've been working on for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So Jim, let's do some rapid fire Big Ten news, because as all the top half of the teams in the Big Ten are getting ready for the NCAA tournament, there's a lot of news, more toward the bottom. We'll start with over in Minnesota. They fire Richard Pitino. Was basically known that was going to happen for the last 2 weeks of the regular season. They made a solid effort in that Big Ten tournament game to take down Ohio State, end up losing. He gets fired. Weirdly, I mean, maybe this is a factor of it being known that he was going to get fired for so long, but about 12 hours later, he's now the head coach men's basketball at New Mexico. Just what was your take on that?
Yeah, I wonder how much behind the scenes stuff they're going on. And I think the athletic director, Mark Coyle, and Pitino did get along. So I wonder if there was kind of a, an agreement that, hey, I understand you're going to get rid of me. Let me pursue this. And I think I have a really good chance at this job. And then, we can kind of help each other out, sometimes you just need a change of scenery, and that's probably a better job for Pitino in terms of the level he should be coaching at. I just think he got overmatched in the Big Ten a lot. And now it's going to be an interesting job. I mean, there's a lot of talent in Minneapolis that they've let get away. Whether it's blue bloods or Wisconsin, even Wisconsin's gone in there and done really well. You can win there. It's just a matter of getting the right guys. And so it's going to be interesting to see who they hire and what type of coach they bring in.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that is most frustrating for a Minnesota fan. If you look at not only your biggest rival in Wisconsin poaching a bunch of players, but then not you would expect every 4 and 5 star that come through Minneapolis or those suburbs to stay there, but they don't get one. You know what I mean? They haven't gotten one or two of them to stay over the last 5-10 years, and it's got to be frustrating to see some of these guys, being NBA players that didn't go to Minnesota. So I think that's one to really look for or kind of watch out for, because I think there's two. Meg Ryan from the Minneapolis Star-Tribune wrote a really good story about how Minnesota is really lagging behind the rest of the conference in diversity hiring too. So I think that there's going to be a push there to not only find a coach that's going to be able to land some of these guys, but to be one of the few black head coaches in the Big Ten and in men's college basketball right now. So I think
saying that though. Yeah, no, I was going to say, I'm sorry to interrupt, but saying that, like, some of the leading names for this opening, Eric Musselman from Arkansas is a Minnesota guy. There's a lot of Minnesota connections. They are all white guys, though, right? I mean, they're all white men. So it'll be interesting. You're right. It'll be interesting to see if they do hire a minority candidate.
Yeah, for sure. And then same kind of vein here. Penn State had the interim coach throughout the season, just with their interesting coaching situational here. They bring in Micah Shrewsbury, the assistant from Purdue, and then not 6 hours later from the announcement, half of the Penn State roster is in the transfer portal. And I get they've made the transfer portal a little easier for guys to get immediately eligible and stuff, but I don't know if Penn State was not like terrible this year. They weren't good. I mean, they were overmatched in the Big Ten, but they were competitive. I mean, they beat Wisconsin once. They were in a lot of these other games. I was just surprised to see I think it was 6 of their top 8 scorers and 8 guys total all transferred or all in the transfer portal now.
Yeah, I mean, I think they kind of went to bat for Jim Ferry all along. They liked him and they played hard for him. I mean, even in that loss to Wisconsin in the Big Ten tournament, they got behind 18 points and fought to the end, made it a game, almost won that game. So I think he was their guy, and I think they played hard for him. And the minute it didn't take Penn State long to move on. I mean, clearly they had someone in mind, and I think they were unhappy that their guy didn't get the job. So it'll be interesting. Michael Shrewsbury is the new coach. He, very highly thought of in the Big Ten and beyond. And I do wonder whether he can kind of talk to some of these kids, I shouldn't call them kids, some of these players, and convince them to stay, to change their mind, because that's a pretty good core there if some of them do. Otherwise, he's looking at a major rebuilding job, and it's not an easy place to win.
No, it's really not. Do you think he can steal one of those 7'4" guys that Purdue seems to just grow on trees out there? That would help. That'd be a nice building block to start with.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then last one here in the Big Ten, another coaching change. Indiana fires Archie Miller. Not that this was unexpected with the way that Indiana's season went, but it was just interesting the pitchforks have been out for that guy for a while. I don't know if he just rubbed some people the wrong way behind the scenes. That seems to be this seems more personal than basketball to me, and just the reaction that there's been to it. I don't know. Indiana is one of those schools that I think is in this fantasy land that they are what they were 25 years ago, and they're just not. And it's really tough when you've got the people with the money that are, funding all this stuff, thinking one way, and then maybe people in the department trying to think more realistically. And when those don't jive, people's, jobs get cost, basically.
Yeah, interesting that it only took two people basically to make this happen. Somebody wrote a check for the buyout, which is like $10 million, and somebody's going to write the check to get a new coach out of his buyout. So it just takes a couple of rich donors to make it happen. You talked about like him rubbing the people the wrong way, and I guess like from afar, I didn't really pay enough attention to know this, but I have seen a couple of references to him being abrasive. And just I think Indiana fans want a certain type of guy that'll, will relate to them and treat them as something. And I don't think he ever made that connection. And that was part of the reason. It was crazy. So Indiana played the game right before Wisconsin on Thursday night down in Indy. It was crazy how many people bought tickets basically just to be unhappy and yell at Archie Miller. It was brutal. The last 10 minutes of the game. I mean, Indiana was terrible the last 10 minutes of the game, but it was crazy how many people were just yelling at him, yelling at the players. As the players left the court, they kind of had to walk in this tunnel, and these fans were just letting them have it. They were coming down from their spots so they could get closer, and just they were ruthless. So I don't know. It's going to be a difficult fan base to make happy. But then again, like, just get to the NCAA tournament once in a while would be a start. And they just haven't done the basics. It's not like they're not contending for titles, Big Ten and otherwise. It's that they, this year they didn't make the tournament. And it's hard to justify that for that program.
Yeah. And it's weird because they're in a similar spot in Minnesota where they have talent close enough that they should be able to put a team out there, put a tournament team on the floor, like you said, to start with that basic, like get a team that can get 18 to 19 wins and get a spot in the tournament and see what happens. But it's just weird that it's just some of these states, and I don't know, I put in our notes here that Indiana is kind of like the college basketball in Nebraska in football, where Nebraska thinks they should be Alabama and just casually ignore the fact that they have maybe one or two high-level Division I football players in the state every year, maybe. It's a little bit, they have a little bit more of an unrealistic view of what they should be, but I think Indiana is a little bit more justified in thinking they should be because they see some of their products go out and do really well in other D1 basketball locations. And like the mindset, I feel like, is why isn't this happening here?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Their talent base, their recruiting base is a little more, they're able to do a little more locally if they want to. They do. The flip side is that they do have to compete with Purdue in state. Champaign is, not a far drive away. So, it's easy for those programs. Kentucky, Louisville, those are all drivable places that can come in and poach kids. So it's kind of tougher, I think, for them to build a wall. But yeah, it's, again, like there's history there. And I don't know if the younger generation relates to that history anymore, if that's even a selling point, but I do think I don't know that Archie Miller's problem was recruiting necessarily. He landed some really high-end guys, but you can't stop there. You've got to get that next tier that kind of help build out the roster and contribute the complementary players. And that's something that he never did.
Did you feel vindicated by not voting for Jackson Trice on the All Big Ten team when he went like?
No, I did vote for him.
Oh, you did? Okay. I remember you had somebody else. Oh no, it was Marcus Carr you were talking about.
It was Marcus Carr, and then I had a lot of time to sit in a car and think this last week.
Because didn't he go like? No, Jackson Trice go like 4 for 20 in the Big Ten tournament game.
He didn't play well, and I did second guess my decision to not reward a guy like EJ Liddell from Ohio State, whose team was much better. I just looked at Trace Jackson Davis at Indiana and realized he had nothing around him. he had to be all worldly for that team to even be semi-competitive, because there wasn't much around him. And so that's why I gave him the benefit of the doubt, and I kind of regret that now.
No, that's fair. All right, as we wrap up with Jim here, I've taken up a lot of his time today on a busy day, but I want to talk a little bit about football. UW football, a little bit slower. We're getting primed up for spring practices, which are going to start March 30th. So you got the John Settle news that he's going to be going to Kentucky. A little bit surprising, but when you just consider, you look at Settle's resume, he doesn't stick around places more than 6-7 years. I think this is a new challenge for him down in Kentucky. And then I think there's a raise component as well down there. So I think there's that news going on. And there's also Reggie Pearson, the safety that had a really strong 2019, then wasn't medically cleared to play in 2020. This is such a weird situation because I think there's solid evidence on both sides that this is not, and when I say both sides, I'm saying like UW coaches and then the Pearson family themselves, that this is not what they wanted to happen. Everybody wished that he would have been cleared, but UW doctors, we haven't got an exact injury yet. I'm trying to get that through reporting and stuff, but UW doctors won't clear him to play. And when you're in Paul Chryst's shoes, if the doctors say you can't play, you can't play. Like there's no real way around that.
Yeah, it's a thing. And the family's come out a couple times and said stuff. I think the dad kind of backtracked a little bit today and again said it was nothing against Paul Chryst, that he's been very supportive. I don't know. It's a tough situation. If you're a doctor, if university, there's a liability aspect to it. If you put someone out there that you don't believe should be out on the field, that's a big no-no. And it's hard without knowing exactly what they're looking at, but just from the outside, it's not an easy situation. And I can understand why you'd want to err on the side of caution. And I understand if you're Reggie Pearson and his family, why you're upset, because the kid wants nothing more than to play football. And he's got two outside doctors saying, he's cleared. Why won't Wisconsin let him play? I get that counterpoint too. It'll be interesting to see where he lands up and what school say it's okay. Once their doctors take a look at it, I'm curious to see where this goes from here.
Yeah, that's the thing too. You were at the liability point, and I think that's part of, if you're Paul Chryst, like I said, if your doctor says no, that's it. Like you can't operate your program where you're overriding what doctors say. Like that's not ever how it's supposed to be. But then if you're another school, I think you're really going to have to, I guess, I don't know if challenge is the correct word, but you're really going to have to prove not only to yourself, but probably to your coaching staff, your medical staff, like, hey, well, Wisconsin says wrong because of X, Y, and Z, and we're going to listen to the outside or listen to our opinion of whatever the situation is over what Wisconsin says. And the toughest part about it all is that Reggie Pearson's a really good player. Wisconsin, that's a loss for Wisconsin. It was a loss last season. I mean, they were lucky enough to have guys like Scott Nelson and Colin Wilder be able to fill that spot. But Reggie Pearson's a good, strong safety. And if he's healthy enough to play, he's a solid Division I player and is going to be an impactful player if he can play. It's just Wisconsin was in this spot where the doctors are saying no. And as tough as it is, you just have to say, well, that's kind of it. That you put your hands up, and that's unfortunate, but that's just kind of the line in the sand.
Yeah, I mean, there's people a lot smarter than us that have made these decisions, and you kind of have to trust them, right? I mean, and again, like we're, we until it becomes officially out there, it's hard for us to sit here and speculate about who's making the right decision, who's making the wrong one. But I just, I think it's tough. It cannot be easy for a doctor to. They've got to be right. If they're wrong, you put a kid's life at stake, right? So I understand the erring on the side of caution.
Yeah, it's tough. We'll see where it goes, and we'll be tracking. I'm trying to speak with the Pearson family sometime this week or possibly weekend. So we'll see if we can get that done. But Jim, thanks so much for your time today. Lots of stuff coming on madison.com, like we mentioned. Lots of basketball, the strength and conditioning story. Please go check that out. Whole lot of stuff coming on madison.com. from Jim. Is there anything you want to make sure people know is coming before the North Carolina game?
No, I'm just going to do something on the offensive rebounding, being the biggest aspect. And like, again, I talked to an assistant coach from a different program, and he did a really good job, I thought, of breaking down this matchup. And to him, it's a very intriguing matchup. It's one of the first round highlights, he called it. So that should be on it should be on our site sometime Thursday. We'll also have, the normal preview box, three keys to the game. And then if Wisconsin wins Friday, we'll quickly turn around something on the matchup versus what will probably be Baylor.
Yeah, absolutely. So make sure you're following along at madison.com. Make sure you're following Jim Polzin, WSJ on Twitter. He's going to be heading down to West Lafayette on Friday morning, you said, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so he'll be down there covering the action in person. Just ton of great basketball stuff. Hopefully, Jim, next week we're talking about a miracle run in the Sweet 16 for the Badgers and lots of exciting stuff, or we're going to be wrapping up a basketball season. But thank you so much for jumping on. And for everybody that's listening, stick around real quick. We will be right back with Todd Milewski talking about Badger hockey. All right, everybody, we are back with Todd Milewski to talk about Badger hockey. Obviously, a huge week for both programs. The men's team just wrapped up. We're recording this Wednesday afternoon. Just wrapped up the Big Ten tournament with a tough loss in the championship game in Minnesota. And the women are into the Frozen Four after a 3-0 quarterfinal win over Providence. We're going to start with the men. Todd, you were down in South Bend. A tough game for the Badgers overall. Obviously, the score, you see it. If you just saw the score, it ended up being 6-4. You might think that was a hard-fought game the whole way. Minnesota really controlled it from the jump, and it wasn't until the beginning of the third period that when the Badgers were already down 5-1 that it seemed like they got some wind under their sails and got some offense going.
Yeah, and the curious thing about it was that it was Minnesota's third game in 3 days, and they'd played 2 overtime games the 2 previous days. Now, the Badgers played an overtime game too, but they had Sunday off, whereas Minnesota had to play Sunday. So if you're thinking there was going to be a team that was, heavy in the legs or a little bit gassed, you wouldn't think necessarily it would be the Badgers, but that's kind of how it looked at the start, just from the way Minnesota came out and was the aggressor from the start, which, credit to them for recognizing that opportunity and being able to jump on it, because they, not only just in going ahead in the first period and then expanding the lead in the second period, but just in style of play, being quicker to pucks, beating the Badgers in races, generally looking like, they had a higher compete level the entire first and second period. Yeah, it did turn around in the third for the Badgers, but it was 5-1 at the start of the period. That was a tall order to be able to come back from that. Now they got it to 5-4.
Yeah, that was the crazy part.
Yeah, with a couple minutes left. And so at that point, you're thinking, well, I mean, this is a team that can throw goals in. So there's a chance here. But they didn't get a great opportunity to tie after that. And Minnesota scored an empty net goal to make it 6-4. And but yeah, I think you got to be a little concerned about just for 2 factors. One, or 2 games in that championship game on Tuesday, and then in the last game of the regular season a week ago Saturday at Michigan State. They were pretty tentative in both of them at the start, which, the first time they acknowledged that, we haven't played a game like this in a long time. And probably none of these guys in college have played a game with these kind of stakes, and that if they won that last game of the regular season, they were Big Ten champions. And they eventually did. They got a couple goals toward the end to win. But I think that carried over a little bit into the championship game Tuesday night, that, there's some, pretty high stakes there. It's your rival too. It's a team that was embarrassed a couple weeks before, losing 12-2 over a 2-game series in at home to the Badgers. And so all those factors kind of came together. And I think you've got to look at that going forward in the NCAA tournament, that the Badgers need to have a little bit more of a, that presence that they've had in the games that aren't as heavy in the implications.
Yeah, and the weird thing was, you mentioned that a couple weeks ago the Badgers just really skated Minnesota off the ice. It seemed like the Badgers had no ability to keep control of the puck on the offensive end. I don't know what it was. Just they were doing a lot of dump and chase, which I got just because of how talented and how good Minnesota's defensemen were playing. But there were just times where they would get the puck across the blue line and then maybe one or two passes. They never seemed to be able to set stuff up in the first two periods. It flipped around in the third, but it seemed like every time they would get in the offensive zone, it was maybe 10, 15 seconds tops, and then Minnesota was going back the other way.
Yeah, one thing that makes that an even more interesting comparison is when they play Minneapolis, that rink is 15 feet wider. And so there's more room to, if you're looking at it from the end of the rink down, you've got more space left and right to spread out. And it's tougher as a defensive unit to cover all of that. Now, when you take away that space and you're playing on, and I should say it's only 10 feet wider than the rink at Notre Dame. That's a 90-foot wide rink, kind of like LeBron is. But still, there's more space in Minnesota to get through a defensive wall, so to speak. That wasn't there for the Badgers on Tuesday. Minnesota did a really good job of eliminating space, clamping down on players, especially Cole Caulfield. When he got the puck, he had a guy on him pretty much the entire time.
Right.
Didn't get a whole lot of open looks. So I think that's some of the game plan you have to expect to see against the Badgers, especially now teams. You're going to be playing a pretty good team regardless of who you get in the NCAA tournament. The better teams are going to have a better chance of doing what Minnesota did. And Minnesota's been a pretty good defensive team. Sorry, the entire season. They've got one of the best goalies in the country in Jack LaFontaine. They've got a really good young defensive core. So they're a team that can do it. Maybe some others can't, but we'll see what the matchup looks like when we find out who they'll play.
Yeah. So Selection Sunday for hockey comes up on Sunday. Obviously, I call it Selection Sunday, but yeah, coming up on Sunday for men's hockey. So keep your eye on that. Todd will be all over it. I wanted to ask you about the goaltending situation because a couple weeks ago you came on the show and we were talking about how the Badgers were rotating goalies, and Cam Rowe started the championship game on Tuesday for the Badgers, and it was ugly. I mean, there's just really no way to put it. I mean, the defense didn't do him too many favors early on, falling down 5-1, but he didn't do himself many favors either and let up a couple ones they probably shouldn't have. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on, do you think as they head into the NCAA tournament that they're going to keep this rotation going, or do you think this is the last time that we saw Cam Rowe in net for UW?
Well, I think I don't think they'll say that they've lost confidence in Cam Rowe. I do think, however, though, when you get into the regionals, you're going to look at a situation where you're probably going to play Robbie Beydoun first, because that's the way you've been doing it for this last couple of months, really, is that Robbie Beydoun gets the first game. Now, if you win that game and you go to a regional final the next day, you're in a situation where you've got to make that choice. And you probably don't want to be making that decision with, 18 hours between games.
Yeah, day of.
Yeah. It's probably not fair for the two goalies to find that out, just before it's going to happen. So I would expect that they'll have a plan in place. And I really don't know where it's going to go, but I think they've had so much confidence in this tandem the way it's been. And I think that Cameron Rowe is he's going to want to redeem himself, to some extent. So I wouldn't be surprised if they stick with what they have. Now it might be moot. I mean, it's a one and done situation. You might not get the second game. We might not find out. But I think that's definitely one of the bigger things to look at as you're going into the next week and a half here before the regional start is where are they with that? Has their mind been changed as a coaching staff? Has their mind been changed in terms of how they play this? Because it was ugly for a while. But you're right that there was some blame to go around on a lot of those goals. I mean, there were guys that were open where they shouldn't have been open for pretty free shots. And that was, not what they wanted to see in terms of how you play a championship game and a game with big stakes.
For sure. And this is just my hockey ignorance showing. The fact that there's such a variety in the rink size, how much do they try to even that out? I mean, obviously when you get to the Frozen Four, it's all on the same ice, but like
right.
for the tournament itself, how much variety is there in the ice?
The NCAA has gone to pretty great lengths, maybe not great lengths, but it seems like it, to making sure that all of the regionals are on rinks that are 200 by 85 or the NHL standard that the Frozen Four is going to be on.
Gotcha.
And that's one of the reasons why that, and the fact that the NCAA has gone away from hosting tournaments on campus, why the regional hasn't been back at the Kohl Center since 2008. So, because the rink is wider at the Kohl Center, but yeah, it does change things, and it's I guess it's a little bit like a baseball field,
the outfield, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, the fences are going to be different in pretty much every park you're in. Now the interesting thing is that I think the teams that built wider rinks, the closer to Olympic sized rinks, a lot of them are looking towards, or already have tried to shrink them down to a smaller size, if not 85 wide, closer to like what's at LeBon, which is 91 and change. So it's kind of a hybrid where you do have more room to work, but it's not feeling like a lake out there.
Gotcha.
Which is what you see at Mariucci in Minneapolis, where there's just so much room, and especially in really deep corners, makes it for even a lot more room to cover. Which changes the game. Maybe not a ton, but it does make for a different look in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and it makes sense why the Badgers, a team that's got a lot of speed and a lot of really skilled skaters, would kind of be an advantage for them. Is that if you're making defensemen cover more ground and you got more speed on them, I mean, you're gonna have the advantage there.
Yep.
I want to jump into the tournament here because that Big Ten championship game not only did it decide the tournament championship for Minnesota, but according to the broadcast, and we were talking before we started recording, it basically locked up a 1 seed for sure for Minnesota, which was, I mean, they were already in line for one, but that just locked it up even more. But it puts the Badgers in a different spot where they're definitely not for sure 1 seed, but I mean, do you think it's pretty much locked in? They're a 2 seed now, or what do you think, Todd?
I would say so. Just looking at the big picture, you're going to see North Dakota and BC are the 1 and 2 in some order. I think right now BC, unless they lose their conference championship, would be the 1 overall. North Dakota would be right there. Then you've got Minnesota State, and Wisconsin, kind of in the next group. Maybe a couple other teams poking their heads in there too. And I think, Minnesota winning yesterday and being second in the Big Ten regular season by 1/1000th of a point in winning percentage. They're a pretty good, I feel like they're a pretty good lock for a 1 seed. And I think Minnesota State from the WCHA has been, the dominant team in that league. And so I think you have to reward them too, especially if they win their conference tournament this weekend too. If they don't, maybe it opens up things a little bit more for some. And again, this is the first year in 25 or something like that we've had any subjectivity in this. It's normally by the pairwise rankings. The committee has no say in changing seeds. They really just only have say in matching up who plays who. But this year there is that opening. They are going off of some of the comparisons that are part of the normal pairwise, but it's not a strict interpretation of what you would normally have in that, where you just go down the list and those are the teams that get in. So I would say the Badgers are more likely looking at a 2 seed, and that really opens up where they can go, because if you're thinking of, if they were a 1 seed, they probably would have been a 1 seed in Albany, just because they would probably been the number 4 overall. And they go in order in terms of placing those number 1 seeds as close as they can to home. So North Dakota is going to be in the Fargo regional because they're the host. That has to happen. BC would be in the I don't know the geography well enough, whether Bridgeport or Albany is closer to BC, but I think it's in my head that it's Bridgeport because they've been there before.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And then the 3 seed Mankato probably, Mankato, Minnesota, whoever it would be going to Loveland, Colorado, and that leaves Albany as the final 1 seed. So it is a little bit more of a question now with the Badgers looking like a 2 seed in where they'll end up. And from a travel perspective, from a mileage, they'll be taking a flight anywhere. So
Sure.
the NCAA should feel like they can put them anywhere because they don't have to worry about limiting, the number of flights, and for cost and travel reasons, they're going on a charter somewhere.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think you're going to have to set up like if you go like the basketball tournament where you put the best 2 seed in the worst 1 seeds bracket, you're talking more than likely Minnesota and Wisconsin being in the same bracket wherever it ends up being. So I just wonder how it's going to shake out.
There's a chance of that. Yeah. I mean, that in a normal year, the committee, unless there's a lot of teams from one conference, prioritizes keeping them away from each other, teams from the same conference away from each other in the first round. Now, that doesn't mean they can't be in the same regional and potentially face each other in the second round, but it does come into consideration at some points. Now, if there's only 3 Big Ten teams in the tournament, there could be a 4th. Notre Dame, depending on where things go from here, could sneak in. Looking at the big picture, I think it's maybe a stretch to get them there, considering they lost their first game in the Big Ten tournament. But I just don't know how it's all going to shake out. And that's really kind of a fun thing, because normally we know everything that's going to happen based on, if this team wins this, we can plug them in here. And it's pretty well done the night that all the championship games are played, or most years, all the championship games are played on the same Saturday. And so that's when by the end of that, we know pretty much what's going on. This year, we're not going to know until that 6:00 selection show on Sunday.
So you wrote about this earlier today. Like I said, we're recording this on Wednesday afternoon, but Cole Caulfield and Dylan Holloway are both in the top 10 for the Hobie Baker Award. Top player in men's hockey. Cole Caulfield, that was kind of a given. Won the Big Ten Player of the Year, leads the country in scoring. Dylan Holloway, though, getting in that top 10. I knew, or we've talked about it on the podcast before, the season he's had, just really being an all-around type of guy. But just, were you surprised to see him in the top 10, or did you think he had a good chance?
I thought it was a little bit of a toss-up, just because there's a bunch of qualified players to be in the top 10, and when a team has someone like Cole Caulfield, who's that the far and away leading candidate for this award, I wonder then whether the people who choose the top 10, which is mostly the coaches, the 61 head coaches all have a vote. Plus there's a small percentage that goes to a fan vote that almost never makes a difference, but they like to give the fans a thought that they have some say in the process anyway. Sometimes you only get one player from a team if there's someone that's really that far and away the favorite. But it is important to recognize that Dylan Holloway has had a really exceptional year,
right?
Especially in the second half, because he played 2 games with the Badgers to start the season in November. Then he was gone for the next 8 because he was at the World Junior Camp for Canada, and then played the World Juniors. When he came back in January, he's got 30 some points in 20 games, or 39 points in 20, something like that. I can't remember. I get all these numbers confused between him and Caulfield sometimes, but that is just a remarkable run he's been on. So I think it was appropriate that the coaches recognize that, even if he doesn't have a shot to win the award. I think everyone that I've talked to is saying that, yeah, this is Caulfield's award. That's a recognition that it's still deserving for a really good season.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's just, anytime you've got 2 people up for basically an MVP award from the same team, you're going to have a little bit of, one guy kind of cancels out the other. But in this case, it's just, this is Cole Caulfield, like you said, Cole Caulfield far away the front runner, but nice for Holloway to special season to get noticed like that.
Exactly.
And just one last note here on men's hockey, Todd. When you look at where this team sits right now, obviously a disappointing finish to that Big Ten championship game. I mean, make that comeback and look like you got a spark going, but then end up losing still. But just where do you think they sit confidence-wise and how they feel about how they're playing right now going into the NCAA tournament?
Well, I have a couple thoughts on that, and they don't really mesh with each other, which is kind of difficult for me to deal with in my own head. Is that, you don't want to go into the tournament overconfident, and I don't think they will be now.
Yeah, sure.
They've had their reality check that if they're not ready to play, they're going to get beat, and they're probably not going to look very good in doing it. So on that side, that's probably a positive for them that they're, hey, we can regroup. We've got some time here. We've got 10 days before regionals or whatever it's going to end up being. We know we're good enough to do this. Let's just, forget about that. Take away, the couple things that we need to correct and move forward and try to be the team that we have been if you're the Badgers for the last 2 months. But on the other side, how much was that damaging to their psyche, I guess? Going down 5-1 after 2 periods against your rival in a championship game that a lot of people are watching. It's on Big Ten Network. It's one of the few games that's on. It's a Tuesday night, so there's not a lot. There was an NCHC championship game going on at the same time, so I can't say that it was undivided attention of the college hockey world. But that, and they said it was embarrassing what happened to them in the second period, and so you do wonder how they take that. The thing I'll say to that though is that they've been a pretty resilient team all year long, and they showed it a little bit last night or on Tuesday night when they came back in the third period. They didn't think they were out of the game, and they proved it. And a lot of people, myself included, I had the story written basically in early in the third period, thought that game was over and there wasn't going to be close to a comeback. They made it 5-4 with 2 minutes to go. So I think that tells you a little bit that there's a little bit of, it just rolls off them. The adversity comes in, they take it in, they push it away. They have to be better than they were in the first and second periods against the Gophers. They know that, but I think they probably will be for the experience. But we won't know until the regionals come, and that's sure. Just still feels like such a long way away now, even though it's it starts March 26th. But that's what they have to work for the next week and a half here.
Yeah, and to your point, like I get where they're coming from, where it felt like it was embarrassing in that second period. And I bet it was more because it wasn't like Minnesota was just like outskilling them or like doing something super flashy. They were just beating them to spots.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned earlier, they were beating the pucks. It was more effort than anything else, like effort and hustle. And when you recognize that as a player, I got to imagine you're just like, man, like we kind of gave it to them in that sense, but we didn't fight back early enough. So yeah, I'm sure that factored in.
They didn't give them enough of a challenge in reality. Yeah. And for a game of that magnitude, you don't want to be the one that's seen as obviously being outworked. And for a lot of the game, that's what the Badgers were.
For sure. All right, so let's jump over to the women's side because they're into the Frozen Four. That's going to be going on this weekend. Like I mentioned earlier in our segment here, beat Providence 3-0 in the quarterfinal. That sounds nice, but I think I was able to watch about half to 3/4 of that game. That was not the Badgers women's hockey team that they expect to be, I feel like, especially on offense. They got up early and they were playing such smothering defense. I don't think they were too worried about letting up goals, but it seemed like offensively they just did not really find a rhythm until I don't even know if they ever really did. They scored a couple of times, but I don't know if they really found themselves.
And it did seem like they took their foot off the gas for a while there because they got a goal in the first period. They were, I think they had the first 21 shots on goal. Providence didn't have a shot until 9 minutes into the second period. So basically the first half of the game, they had to do almost no work in their own end, which can lull you to sleep as a team in reality. And then then it just like turned on for Providence in an instant, where they got a turnover and then they got 5 shots on goal in their first 5 shots on goal in the span of a minute. And so that really was like, well, where did this come from?
Yeah.
And so I can imagine if you're the Badgers, that puts you on your heels for a little bit. And it seemed like it took them a while to respond to that and get the game kind of back into their the way they would want to play it. Probably didn't happen in reality until the third period, when they did get another goal from Sophie Shirley, who then also scored late into an empty net to make it the 3-0 final. But yeah, it wasn't the most, I'd say, convincing victory. But I think it's worth noting the context of the situation that they're in. It's they're playing in Erie. The Frozen Four, they had to get there Saturday for their game on Tuesday, because they had to be tested and they had to go through quarantines and all those kind of things. This is just part of what makes this year weird,
Right.
For college hockey, because you've got these things that, I mean, nobody really knew about until the week of. So the planning for it has been just completely different. Now you can say that when you get onto the ice, it doesn't matter. Nobody's, you're playing the same game that you've always played, but those background factors are hard to disassociate from what's going on just in general with lives of college athletes right now. So I don't know if there's, big cause for concern out of what we saw from them yesterday. I mean, it was still a shutout, their 5th straight shutout in a quarterfinal game, their 4th straight shutout in a NCAA tournament game overall, going back to when they didn't allow a goal in the 2019 tournament altogether. Of course, last year's was canceled, but so maybe you're just picking a little bit because there's it's always gone so well, and you expect it to kind of be that way, that you can kind of nitpick at some of these little things.
No, that's fair. And that is probably because the bar is set so high for this program, exactly. And what they're just used to. It's this to not look like world beaters every time out, then you start picking apart, like you said. But now that they're in the semifinal here, playing a team they're very familiar with in Ohio State. Most recently, they just beat them last weekend. Yep. In the WCHA final. I was like, right. I had it right in my head, and I started questioning myself for some reason. So they just beat them 3-2 in overtime. But you had an interesting note, like when you look at the last 3 seasons, if the Badgers lose, more often than not, it's to Ohio State.
Yeah, so the Badgers have lost 17 times in the last 4 seasons total. 7 of them have been against Ohio State.
Sure.
Minnesota 4 times, Bemidji State 2. Those are the only other teams that have beaten them more than once. And on the flip side, Ohio State has lost more to Wisconsin than any other team in the last 4 years. So these are the teams that are, you can say it's the WCH is a Wisconsin and Minnesota league. Well, in the last couple of years, Ohio State's really jumped up the order and really been more of a challenge to Wisconsin in a lot of ways, just from the games that they've played. Those 7 losses that the Badgers have to Ohio State, they scored a total of 5 goals in them. So that's something to keep in mind when you're looking at Thursday's semifinal game, is that if Ohio State can play the game they want to play, which is clogging up the neutral zone, taking away the middle of the ice in the defensive zone, so the chances that the Badgers get have to come from outside, and you're looking for some bounces or, just an exceptional shot for someone. Not to say that the Badgers don't have a Darryl Watson, Sophie Shirley, who can make those exceptional shots from outside, but it's a lower percentage chance. If they can play that way, they've got a really good chance. And that's the way that they've beaten the Badgers in the last few years, is having that defense and an opportunistic offense, getting a goal off of a rush or a power play. So that's, I think, if you're the Badgers, what you have to try to avoid is playing into that kind of game. You need to open up. You need to get to the front of the net. You need to get traffic. You need to get pucks and rebounds and go hunting for pucks around the net. and so that's what I'm looking for to see how the game goes. And there have been 16 games that have been non-tie, so someone has won in those 16 games over the last 4 years between the teams. 13 of them have been won by the team that scored first. So
okay, so yeah, so the hot start matters.
It does set a little bit of a tone. Whoever gets that first goal can play a little bit more or dictate a little bit more of their style. So, so that's a couple of things to keep an eye on as we're going into Thursday's semifinal game.
Gotcha. So have they announced the time yet? I'm just looking at NCAA.com and still the TBA. So
6:00 Central Thursday, and that's on ESPNU.
Gotcha. Okay. So if they were to advance to the championship game, they would either play Northeastern, who has been the number one team, or was the number one seed, or 21-1-1 this season, or Minnesota Duluth, a team that they played multiple times throughout this season. I mean, not that they're looking ahead or anything here. Obviously, Ohio State's the challenge in front of them here, but do you think there's a possibility that Northeastern were to lose to the Minnesota Duluth just so they would see somebody different, or what do you think on that matchup?
Yeah, I think that one's I mean, I think Northeastern is a favorite in that game for sure, but I don't put it past Duluth to be able to come out of that game. Their top line can play with anyone's top line, and they showed that against the Badgers in the last weekend of the regular season. They were step for step with them, if not had a little bit better of the play a lot of those games. So if they can do that, now Northeastern's got two of the better players in the country, including the best goalie in the country. So it's going to be hard, and especially Duluth had to win a 1-0 overtime game in the quarterfinals, so it's not like they've set the world afire scoring wise, but they can. So it's got to be interesting to see how that one shakes out, because I think Northeastern is probably the better team top to bottom, but I don't know if they've been as challenged throughout the season as Duluth has been in the teams that they have to play. And you're going to get me on my soapbox here for a minute, so I apologize in advance, but the WCHA and Hockey East both got 3 teams into the tournament. And if you're going to make the argument to me that the Providence team that the Badgers played on Tuesday is better than the Minnesota team that got left out of the tournament, so that there would be a 3-3 split between Hockey East and WCHA, I would love to see the evidence, because I just looked at that game on Tuesday that the Badgers played against Providence and was just thinking, I would hate to be the Minnesota coach watching this, knowing that this probably should be Minnesota playing as the 7th seed ahead of Providence. So that's me in my soapbox. And I understand why Gophers fans are upset about that. And especially now more after the way that game went. It would have been a much better game, much more competitive game to my mind, had Minnesota been in over Providence. But we just really didn't know. I mean, the committee had no way of comparing, teams from this league against teams from this league, because there weren't non-conference games. So, I guess maybe it was fair in some respect that each of those leagues got 3 teams in, but man, if you can't recognize that the WCHA is probably the better league, that's part of the problem, I think.
Yeah, no, I hear you there. All right, so make sure you guys are checking that out. ESPN 6 o'clock, or ESPNU, 6 o'clock on Thursday, semifinal game for Badgers women's hockey. And then make sure you're following Todd on Twitter, Todd Milewski on Twitter for him. Lots of stuff coming from this weekend for women, and then coming up next week for the men's hockey team in the NCAA tournament. Todd, is there anything you want people to know? Look for our madison.com coming up next few days.
I just want people to know
coverage.
Yeah, exactly. I'm happy now that there will be no more game days that include both the women and the men playing.
Absolutely, no more double duty.
That's right. We've got a story coming about what we talked about with the Ohio State Wisconsin women's kind of budding rivalry and how those games have gone. over the last few years. And stories up now about Cole Caulfield and Dylan Holloway being Hobie Baker finalists. Later this week, we'll find out who's in the top 3 for the Patty Kazmaier Award, which is the Women's Player of the Year award. And Daryl Watts is one of the 10 finalists, and so is Sophie Shirley. But I think Watts is probably the player that you would think has the best chance of being in the top 3 for that. Otherwise, I'll have something looking ahead to what the men's tournament, NCAA tournament might look like, and what we know now, and what to look for in the last week of conference tournament, or last days of the conference tournaments. And then off we go into seeing who the Badgers are playing in the regionals for the first time in 7 years. They'll be in the NCAA tournament. So it's it's a big time for Badgers hockey.
Yeah, very exciting stuff. Full steam ahead for Todd. Make sure you're following along with him, and make sure you're following along at madison.com. A ton of great stuff going up every day, basketball, hockey, all types of stuff there. So, Todd, thanks so much for jumping on after a long day traveling back from South Bend, and a long weekend coming up with all this stuff. So thanks for jumping on with us. And for everyone listening, thanks you so much for listening. We'll be back next week.